This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ashura Farida. I am a pilot in Uganda, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Bambino Life Organization, an organization that promotes girl-child education and empowerment and also caters for the welfare of underprivileged children. Today, we have Abbie Newman, CEO, Mission Kids Child Advocacy Center. She's a registered nurse and lawyer. Abbie, you will tell us more about yourself. And then let me first introduce Colleen Lelli. I hope that is the right pronunciation. She is a professor at Cabrini University and an expert in research and in teaching in the area of domestic violence. Today we have two experts in the house, and I'll let them both introduce themselves briefly before we start. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Ashaba. It's so nice to join you here. I know you very well. My name is Abbie Newman. I'm the CEO of Mission Kids Child Advocacy Center in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania in the United States. My background is that I am a registered nurse and I specialized in pediatrics for years before I went to law school. I became a lawyer and I worked with hospitals and nurses and doctors, and I helped defend them in medical malpractice cases when they were brought. And somewhere around 2005, I started getting into the field of child protection, and I was asked to begin as executive director the Child Advocacy Center in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. A child advocacy center is a place where we facilitate a team response to child abuse so that the child can tell the story in their own words, and they're questioned by a forensic interviewer whose only job is to ask the child questions in a non-leading fashion so they can tell their own story. It's a very child-friendly center, and we work with all of the police departments and the social workers and the prosecutors in our community. They all come to our center for the interview, but the child doesn't have to meet with them and be questioned by them. They're questioned by the child-friendly interviewer at the time. We opened in 2009, and we've worked with over 5,000 children just in our county. Our county is about 800,000 people, just for context, since then. And I'm delighted to be here and help in any way that we can.
Thank you so much, Abbie. Colleen, will you briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. And I want to thank you again for having me today, and thank Abbie for setting this up so that we could meet. You're very lovely, and I'm excited to be here. So my name is Colleen Lelli, and I am a professor at Cabrini University, which is in Pennsylvania in the United States. I have over about 20 years of experience working with educators and educating them about domestic violence, but also children who have been affected by trauma. And so currently in my role as an associate professor at Cabrini, I am also the director of the Barbara and John Jordan Center for Children of Trauma and Domestic Violence Education. And so in my role, we do just that. We do a lot of research, but we also educate others about these systemic issues with trauma and domestic violence. Furthermore, I have a book coming out in the fall regarding educating educators about domestic violence, and I'm currently on the board of two organizations. One's called Laurel House, which serves all of Montgomery County. So we're kind of a sister agency to Mission Kids. So I'm co-president currently there. I'm also on the board of another neighboring county. It's called Delaware County Women Against Rape, and that's another organization. And their mission is deeply embedded in supporting victims of domestic violence, but sexual assault especially, and also other violent crimes. So they're more of an umbrella organization. So I thank you again for having me, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Colleen. As you can see, we have both amazing, incredible ladies and experts in their different respective fields. And we're going to start off. Colleen, I have a few questions for you, and I'll also be asking Abbie later on. So one of the questions that I want to ask you are related especially to what is happening here in my country, Uganda, or Africa in general. So what we have been having are more cases, especially when it comes to domestic violence in different homes. And that is, for example, us, we are still in partial lockdown. But before, when the lockdown was complete and there was no going out or anything like that, we were seeing on a daily basis on the news women being killed, men being beaten, because as we know, domestic violence does not only affect women. And I want to know, why do you think there's been a rise of domestic violence, especially in this pandemic season?
Right. Yeah. And honestly, I can say through the organization that I'm working with, Laurel House in Montgomery County, we saw a rise as well as cases. We have the ability for people to call when they don't feel safe, and so they've been using that service at a much higher rate. And I personally, I think that, you know, a lot of the research will still come out as a result of this. I think that we'll still, but I think one of the reasons why is because being in close quarters for a long time can be very stressful. You know, honestly, this pandemic has been traumatic for a lot of us, if not all of us. And so because of that, there's a rise, and we're seeing it because we're in close quarters, we're around each other all the time, and it becomes more stressful. And so I think that that could be some of the reasons why. I don't want to say the good thing about this, but perhaps one of the good things is, in at least here, we have more people calling, and perhaps that's because we've educated them more about the signs of domestic violence. And so they know what's happening, and they're feeling more comfortable because of being educated and recognizing that I need help. And by asking for help, it's not shameful. And so here in the United States, we're finding more people asking for help. And so I think that that can be a very good thing. In terms of educating others about this issue.
Okay, thank you so much. And we are going to come back to that topic later on. And I'm also going to leave you with a question before I go back to Abbie. I've noticed that sometimes people find it hard reporting domestic violence cases because there is a shame around it. I mean, if I tell, you know, a friend, or if I tell authorities that my husband is beating me, it's like I'm breaking this appearance that I'm trying to keep. And most of the times I'm going to be seen as lesser of a woman, like I've failed my duties, and maybe that's why I'm being beaten. So I want to know what is around that, what is around reporting, and then also people feeling embarrassed or ashamed. So I'll leave you with that question, and then we're going to go to Abbie. Abbie, I would like to ask one of, you know, many questions. Do you think, and this is actually connected with what I just asked Colleen earlier, do you think that domestic violence will eventually lead to child abuse, especially in a homestead where, say, one of the partners is being abused? Do you think it will later transfer to a child being abused too?
So I would say, first of all, there's so many different kinds of abuse. If a child is living in a home where there is domestic violence, even if the abuser is not physically harming that child, they're being psychologically harmed by watching the violence and the abuse against the mother, usually, who is being abused. So even if that child is not being touched, that child is being abused, and that child is suffering from living in that home where there is so much violence going on. Also, that child is learning, and I've said this to you in other interviews, children learn what they live. So if you want to know the best way to stop both domestic violence and child abuse, it's giving children good role models so that they know how they should act when they're adults. If a boy child watches their father constantly hurting their mother, they may feel that that's the way that women and girls and wives are supposed to be treated. Not always, but they may. And so the best way to stop it is to be good role models for your children. And then does that lead to further now actually hands-on abuse of the child? It might. It's very hard to tell. What we know in the United States, and this is what Mission Kids and Laurel House know from working together, that police will often go in and be called into a domestic violence situation, and there are children there. And so we've talked about how do we take that child out, or what should that child tell? But then we're more concerned about the child's safety if they do. And it's very difficult to reach these children living in these situations unless the mother is willing to leave and take the child with them to a safe place. And that's very hard for the reasons that Colleen has talked about and knows about more. But yes, the basic answer to your question is I would be concerned from a physical viewpoint as well, that physical violence against a mother may turn into physical violence against a child. A child may try to intervene, and in the course of that intervention of trying to help their mother, the abuser will then hit that child. It could be as simple as that, not even trying to aim at that child initially. So yes, I would be concerned is the bottom line.
Thank you, Abbie. And I do totally agree with what you're saying, because as you can see, if a child grows up in a home where there is domestic violence, one of two things will happen. That child will grow up to be an abuser themselves because they think that behavior is totally okay, or they'll even grow up to resent. And I think most parents or most women, again, I want to talk mainly about from the African perspective, is that most women will not walk away. If they are being abused, they will never think that it's going to affect their child in any way. More than anything, they try to stay and make everything work against all odds, which is very toxic, a very toxic environment for a child to grow up in. And I think people have to come to terms with that if someone is doing this to you, eventually they're going to do it to your own child. And do not make a mistake of walking away and leaving your child behind. We shall come back to.
Yeah.
So, because, yeah, Colleen, I would like to ask you, what are the steps? What steps should a victim take to protect themselves when they are facing domestic violence?
That's a great question. And to Abbie's point, there's many different types of abuse. And even in a domestic violence relationship, there's different types of abuse within that relationship. And so, there's also what we know as the cycle of abuse, right? So they'll harm, and the abuser will harm the victim, and then they'll come back and say they're sorry and it won't happen again, and the victim thinks it's changed, and so then it's just it's a cycle. And so I think that there's a lot of different signs. There's a lot of different abuse, and I think that that's really important. And I'm sure I'm not answering your question clearly, but one of the things I want to point out is economic abuse is huge. And I would imagine possibly in your culture even more so, maybe, in terms of what that means is you have one provider, and so the woman believes then, and I'm just talking from a gender perspective here, that they have to stay in the home and protect, and their job and their role is in the home, and so they try to do that the best they can. And I think what's really important for victims to recognize is this cycle of abuse, that they can that it seems like everything is going okay, and then it swings up and there's some abuse, and it doesn't have to necessarily be physical. It could be emotional, which I think you mentioned earlier. And then there's, this term here that's sometimes used called gaslighting. And so with gaslighting, they make the victim believe, the abuser makes the victim believe that it's all their fault. And it's this psychological abuse that Abbie was talking about. And so, in terms of children, but in this case, it can happen with the victim of domestic violence as well. So there's a lot of different facets, and I think that it's important to educate a lot of people about this. And so I think the more education that occurs, the more people will understand all the different intricacies of domestic violence. So it's really good that we're doing this, because you might not be able to affect change with one person right now, but you might be able to affect change with another because they're ready. And that's another piece of it, when they're ready and they recognize that it's just getting too big of an issue. And they need that support. And so going to agencies and getting that support is really important. And it took us a long time here, and we're still working here in the United States to get people to recognize that. So it does take some time to have that change.
Thank you, Colleen. I do agree with you that sometimes abuse takes different steps or different stages that sometimes you may not recognize it. I know what gaslighting is. I know someone can guilt trip you in thinking that they are right and you are wrong, and you should ask for forgiveness here and there. And I also know that most of the times people or women are afraid to walk away from different situations because of the financial bit of it. They're afraid to start from down, especially those who have children. You look at your children, they have to eat. So you decide to stay in this situation because you want your children to continue with their school, you want them to have food, even if it is toxic for them. And one of the things that I left you with, the question that I left you with earlier, is that why is it hard for women, or why do they find embarrassment around that topic about reporting what is happening to you? Why should it be something someone should be embarrassed about? I mean, if you are suffering, there shouldn't be something like that. Why do you think there is that? Why do some people see it as embarrassment to report, when they're facing domestic violence?
Yeah, I think it's that psychological piece that we talked about. I think that it's also the stigma. For so long, if there's something wrong in a relationship, then it's the victim's fault, right? And the victim being told repeatedly that it's their fault, right? And who's going to believe me? I mean, he just said it's my fault, or she said it's my fault. So who's going to believe me if I report it? And then to your point, I'm going to have to leave where I'm living, and that's going to uproot my family. Do I want to do that to them? So I think there's so many reasons why, and they don't, even without the victimization piece, the unknown is scary, right? People, when they leave their jobs, like, do I want to go to another job? I know this job, right? I know this neighborhood, or I know this area. Do I want to uproot my family? So I think all of it can be scary. And that's why it might take time to leave. It does take time to leave. And having someone to talk about these things with, a counselor, and the counselor is most likely, and I'm not a counseling person, but they're not going to start off by saying, yes, you should leave today, right? They might, depending on the situation and the dire danger. But most of the time, there's going to be multiple conversations before it gets to a point where they have a safety plan in place to help the victim leave. A safety plan is very important. And so I think it's that psychological piece that I was referring to. I think that's why. And there's a stigma. Until we break down that stigma, there's going to still be concerns about leaving.
And I think I think Colleen's point, I'm sorry, it goes back to what I was just saying about it's generational. It goes from one generation to the mother. So you have a victim who's being told by her abusers, Colleen said, it's your fault. If you were a better wife, if you cleaned the house better, if you cooked the food better, I wouldn't feel like I had to do this to you. Well, it's really hard for her to break that cycle if she saw her father doing that same thing to her mother, and her mother accepted it and said, yes, I must have been bad, and then says to the daughter, be a good wife. You have to be a better wife. It is really hard to understand it's not your fault. And then you put children in the mix of it. And so it's already embedded in them when an abuser says to them, it's your fault, that, oh, maybe it really is my fault. And that's why it's so hard, but so necessary to break the cycle. But it's really difficult. So,
yeah.
Thank you. And Colleen, I also want to ask a bit before we go to Abbie. The protection, like I'd asked, what has been some of the advice that you've given women, especially who have been stuck in this situation, and before they get to report, how do they protect themselves? What are the steps they should take to protect themselves from, what is happening to them in that particular situation?
Yeah, and there's a number of tips I can give, but one of the biggest ones I give is use your resources, right? So within your community, you have agencies and people that will help. And a lot of times they are free. And so going to those agencies and getting that support, you might have to do so carefully depending on how closely your abuser is watching you. So you want to be careful in doing that. But by getting that support, that will help. Again, to break the cycle, but to leave safely. And so coming up with a safety plan, making sure that you have things set aside, confiding in somebody that will support you. So if you have to give them some things before you decide to leave is really important. So having that listening ear is an important piece. And again, I'm not a counselor. So what I tell people, I'm an educator, I tell them you need to seek counseling, and there's no shame in counseling. And I think that in this regard, even still in the United States, there's a lot of shame in going to counseling. And so the more that we can tell people it's not shameful. And, what we have found, and again, I don't know the technology there, so I apologize if I'm not recognizing. Here, what we have found in the United States, in our area with Laurel House, a lot of our victims actually like this platform better they're able, if their abuser is at work and they're at home, they can get on a Zoom call or on a GoToMeeting call and speak with a counselor. And that's actually been very helpful. Again, so there's ways that you have to think sometimes outside the box, and sometimes abusers decide to stay. Well, if I decide to stay, how can I be safe? What can I do? And so those are some of the things that would be really helpful. Involving sometimes the church, whatever church they belong to, is helpful as well. So these are just a few ideas. There's many more. And again, culturally, you might have some other ideas, but those are some of the ones that we have used here and have found helpful.
Thank you so much, Colleen. Well, a bit of, well, we do have technology, yeah. So we do have the city, of course, and the rural. I mean, every place has that. But we do have, people have access to such. Of course, not all of them. And for me, when it comes to the work that I've been doing with my foundation, is that I tend to focus on the rural people who do not have access to technology, who do not have access to this. But even them, I mean, if you are to date back, and I'm not even giving us a history, a life history, because if you are to date back in, you know, maybe 500 years ago, when there was no technology, how do you think people communicated? Of course, people were communicating. So even in the rural areas, we have paternal aunties who come in whenever you have you know, problems in your marriages. We have you know, yes, they are there, so they are the ones who talk to you. The only difference though is that here, because of the setback, it's only maybe people who are in town who have this mentality of I know my rights as a lady, I know my rights as this. But in the rural areas, if you are beaten by your husband and you go to your paternal auntie, she's not going to tell you to leave the man. She's going to tell you, this is what we also went through, you know. A man, and there is this saying that if he doesn't beat you, means he doesn't love you. This is in the rural areas. So I agree with what you're saying. There has to be awareness so that people know their worth, they know their value, they know that, you know what, you don't have to beat me to show that you love me. You can talk to me like a normal human being, and I'll understand what you're trying to drive across. So thank you for that. And then Abbie, I would like to ask you this question. Spotting the signs, especially if they're well hidden. And again, this is a broad topic, I know, and I'm trying to focus on, I'm not trying to pick on one particular form of abuse. I know there is sexual abuse, I know there is, you know, physical abuse, but I also know that there are abusers who are smart enough to want to evade, you know, the police or the law enforcers. And so they'll be smart with what they do. If you know, an uncle is raping their niece, they're going to do it in a smart way so that they're not detected. And when it comes to young children who are even afraid to speak up for themselves and say that this is just going to be a mind game of figuring out, is this child abuse or are they not? So I guess my question is, how do you spot the signs, especially if they're well hidden in a child?
Yeah, so you bring up a really hard topic and a really good question. First of all, you're absolutely correct about it being hidden. It's important to know that at least in the United States, well over 90% of the time, the child knows their abuser. It's not a stranger. It's somebody that they know and somebody that they know well. 50% of the time, it's actually a family member. So none of the examples that you're giving are unreasonable. Child abusers are master manipulators. They fit in with the community. They're often people that the family and the town loves. And so it puts the child in this awful position of, if they say, Uncle whoever has been doing this to me, the reaction first might be, oh no, that can't be, he's such a wonderful guy. Children don't make these things up. They have no frame of reference to make a story like that up. They wouldn't know to make up that kind of story. It's really important in terms of signs, and sometimes hard to do culturally, for parents. First step that every parent can do, teach their child the proper names of their private parts. Because if you use the wrong name, there is one name here for a girl child's private parts. Some slang is that it's a pocketbook. And so we know of a story where a child went to her teacher and said, Uncle so-and-so touched my pocketbook. And the teacher said, okay, and just ignored it and didn't understand that that child was actually disclosing sexual abuse to them. So if the correct words are taught, the child, when they report, will first of all report the correct words so they can be heard when they're trying to express it. In terms of signs, they're so varied, but you know your child, and you know when there's a change in your child. If your child has been happy and outgoing, and suddenly they're withdrawn and quiet, there's something going on with your child. If your child suddenly starts wetting the bed at night, and they might be 6 or 7 years old and they haven't done that in years, there's a problem and there's something going on with your child. In terms of bruises, if a child ends up with black eyes for physical abuse and they say, oh, well, I tripped. Well, how did you trip? And they can't give you a really good story, then your child really didn't trip. You know, unless you could really figure out how that story matches a black eye, there's something going on. And just, you know your child, you can feel it. I can't tell if it just changes in your child if they are hiding something. And if they tell you, listen to them and believe them. That's the other thing. And I'll say it again, children have no frame of reference for making up these stories. They just don't. So I don't know if that answered your question well enough or not, because it is a very broad topic.
No, actually it does answer. And I think what I get most from what you're saying is that if you are a parent, it's your responsibility to be able to study the behaviors of your child and see how they behave. Whenever there is a change, you can be able to tell and detect. They don't really need to come out and say words to you. You can tell when they're withdrawing. You can tell, you know, when they're not opening up enough, when something is wrong. And if you are a relative, either way, because I feel it's the responsibility of a parent to know first before even a relative does know. But it's about seeing and studying and also listening when the child comes and they try to tell you something, or when they approach you, and you have to believe them. You have a responsibility to believe them first before you can disapprove whatever they're saying. Believe them, follow through, see what they're reporting about, and then, you know, that is what I'm getting from what you're saying.
Yeah,
and it's
absolutely. And if a child tells you, I don't want to go with that person, you know, my initial response as a mother was, stop being so spoiled. You're going, I need you to do that. You know what, there might be a real reason they don't want to go with that person. I don't want to sit on his lap. Don't make your child sit on his lap. I don't want to kiss them hello. Oh my gosh, don't make them kiss hello. This weekend, my family and I, we went out and we were hiking. Things have opened so that we can go out and go into nature. And we passed 2 parents with a young child on the trail that we were hiking on. And they said to the little boy, he had to be maybe 5 or 6 years old, say hello to us who were strangers to them. And the little boy said, no, I don't want to. Perfectly reasonable. But the parents' response, thinking they were being polite and that the little boy was being impolite to us, was, oh no, just tell them that you're shy. And I stopped and I turned around and I said, oh no, he doesn't have to say hello to us. That is his right. And in fact, my daughter, who's in her 20s, who should know better, said, Mom, don't tell them how to parent. And I said, oh no, absolutely not. They were telling their child to talk to a stranger, and that little boy had the absolute right instincts that it's okay, I think, in that situation for me to do what I did. So
that is true. That is true. And what you're saying does make sense. And I know, because right now we may have some of the Bambino Life followers watching this, and most of them are from Uganda. And what I want to add on this, even if I'm actually, when it came out of my mouth, I realized it's not only limited to Ugandans to think this way, but as a lady or as a woman, you have a responsibility towards your child first before anyone else. So it goes beyond, you don't even have to wait to spot the signs of abuse. You have to take the preventative measures so that even the abuse does not happen in the first place. Let me say you're a single mother, and then you've started dating, and then you have a boyfriend, you're not even been with him 2 months, you're already introducing him to your child, and you're leaving your boyfriend with your children. That is going to be something that is going to become a problem, I think, after some time. Or as a parent, you have these relatives or distant relatives, uncles, and you're forcing your daughter to hang with the uncles. How well do you trust them, even if they're family? Because we know most of the abuse cases happen or are done by close relatives, or are done by family, by the people we know. So it means that there is that form of familiarity that comes before the abuse comes. Because if an uncle who has been living with you for some time feels the need to abuse the child, they feel like there is that level of familiarity where the child is not going to report it, or they're going to see them as a good uncle who has been giving me gifts. Even if your child comes home with gifts that you didn't buy for them, you have to question this. Where did you get these gifts? If a certain uncle keeps on buying your daughter gifts, there is something wrong with that situation. As a parent, you have to see that. If your daughter is 5 years old and you let her, play or hang around with your relatives, teenage boys who are 15 and above, there is something wrong. There is an age gap. They shouldn't have things in common to be hanging around. You should be hanging with her fellow age mates. So I believe there are so many things that happen as a parent that you should take preventative measures before waiting for the abuse to happen, because we know once the abuse happens, the trauma has been done, and it takes a lot of time before that child can go back to their rightful innocent self.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Colleen, back to you. The question that I wanted to ask. So many ladies who are listening to this, maybe you have a boyfriend, maybe you don't have yet, you're entering the game of dating. You have this gentleman, you love him so much, he's amazing. How do you spot the signs that, he will become abusive at a later stage? And of course, I know you're not a therapist, but I want to, because I know that if people come reporting to you every time, surely there is a cycle that you've seen repeating itself over and over and over. So what are those signs that you can spot and know that, what, of course, besides the gaslighting, and that this guy is going to be abusive later on? And those are the red flags that we shouldn't ignore as women. What are some of those signs?
That's a great question. And so, something I alluded to earlier is something called the power and control wheel. And so basically, are they using types of behaviors that are indicative of domestic violence? So what are those behaviors? Well, some of them could be using using money, right, as a way to well, you don't have to work here, I'll support you, right? And that could be kind-hearted, right? And some people might, but that could be another tool that they're using to keep them in control. Here in the US, not allowing them to travel by themselves. Okay, so that could be something else. And like, you're not allowed to go out of the house, I will go with you, and guising it under like, I'm protecting you. Technology abuse has been very prevalent here. So using text messages or using the phone as ways to track even the person in different tracking devices, ways to track somebody or if you're going somewhere, when you get there, you have to call me, right? Not allowing them to see family members or friends, right? So if you want to go out and see a friend, maybe you have a child and it's a mom of another child and you want to, and not allowing you to do that could be another way. And so and using intimidation. So they intimidate you into thinking that you don't know what you're talking about, or if you go here, I'm going to do X to you, right? And so using that intimidation, sometimes using children, right? If you if you decide to leave me, I'm going to take the children from you. Or if it's a new relationship like you referred to and they're just dating and maybe they have a child, using that child as a way, well, I don't know if you're a good mother, so you need me. So there's lots of different signs. A lot of it has to do with that power and control, that struggle. And so, there's a number of those that would fit in here.
Thank you so much, Colleen. And actually, to even add on what you're saying is that if you're dating someone in the beginning stages and they isolate you from the people that you know, from your friends, from your family, they're trying to be the main source of everything, of your happiness, so that you look only up to them. And then you think it's love, you think they love you, but in the end, it's, like you said, a power struggle game where someone wants to show that they're in control. Even someone who does not value your dreams. They see theirs as more important. I think most of these are behaviors of a narcissist and how you spot them. But above all, before you enter a relationship, I feel like you should be able to educate yourself about these different things, the gaslighting, that there is so much going on. And thank you so much, Colleen. And lastly, Abbie, I would like to ask, reporting, when it comes to reporting, how can you report these cases to the authorities without putting the victim in a line of danger? How can you go about it in a safe way without putting the child in danger?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So in the United States and in many places around the world, there are agencies like Mission Kids, and it's specifically a child advocacy center where we have done a lot of community education so that we partner with the police and with the prosecutors and with social workers, so that when a case of child abuse is reported, everybody comes together as a team to hear that child. And that's not to say that 100% of the time child abuse is found. There are actually many times when the team walks away after an interview with that child and says, oh, this was a mistake, it was a misunderstanding, and nothing happens to the alleged abuser. The child is still intact and healthy. But if we do feel that there is abuse, again, it's like a community protection around this child. So how do you keep a child safe in Uganda, where I don't think that there are any child advocacy centers to report police? First of all, I think there needs to be community education with the police. There has to be education to make them understand the prevalence of child abuse, how often it happens, that children don't make these stories up. There have to be repercussions for abusers if, after going through the legal process, somebody is found to have been an abuser, because if an abuser doesn't feel that there are any repercussions, there's no reason to stop. In the meantime, until you can get that education and that involvement with the community done, to make that child safe, make sure that that you have friends, that you have relatives that believe and support you and your child, and will just make sure that the child is safe, is not left alone, and will keep the alleged abuser away from them. It becomes really tough when there's cases of intrafamilial child abuse, because we see it happen here all the time. When a child reports abuse definitely happened to that child, but yet you have family members that don't want to believe it. Because like I said before, child abusers are manipulative, and they are in a community. They're not hanging out in the shadows where everybody says, oh, stay away, he's a child abuser. That's not the way that they work. And so it can be very difficult, even if you do have places like a child advocacy center, because families don't always believe. So I'm going to go back. The first education needs to be community education to people in a community. This is what child abuse looks like. This is what happens to children. It can be intergenerational. Abusers are in the community, and children don't make these stories up, and they don't forget it. If it happens, the memories don't just go away. They don't leave the child because the child was young when they happened. So I would say it's got to be a community response. It's a parental response. You have to protect your child. It starts with the parent. I agree with that. If a child is in a very sad situation and doesn't have parents, it starts with their family members, whoever is responsible for them. You need to believe that child. The child needs to have you to support them and believe them. And that's the best I can do. And again, we're happy to help in any way that we can, help and bring response to Uganda.
Thank you so much, Abbie, and you are very correct. We do have some advocacy centers in Uganda, but I don't think there are that many, or I don't think they spread out to places, for example, like the rural areas where most of these abuse situations happen. And also what I'm getting from you is that we all have a responsibility, as people in the community, to play our part when it comes to protecting the children. As a foundation, we are partnered with an organization. It's called My Body is My Body. It's UK based, and what they do is that they have songs, and these songs are supposed to help children know their body parts, or know the bad touches, know where they aren't supposed to be touched. And I think we have the education every child or every volunteer who's supposed to be teaching children about child abuse or promoting that, we have been training most of our volunteers to be aware about such situations and how to handle those particular cases of abuse. It's really a great program in different languages. It's also in Kiswahili, and it's being spread around in different schools. And also another thing is also partnering with the Mission Kids Advocacy, and we're looking forward to having that also come here in Uganda, because I believe this is something that is not talked about a lot. You have cases where children are being married off at just 11 years of age, which is very sad, but it actually happens. And most of parents don't see it as a wrong thing. You know, they see as long as a child starts menstruation, then you are a woman, which is not correct. Because if you're looking at the situation, if a child gets married off young at 11, chances are she's going to do the same to her daughter, because it's okay, it was done to her, so it should be okay also if my daughter does it. If I survived it, you can also survive it. So I do agree, and we do really need awareness around the topic, around the situation, both in child abuse and domestic violence. We need people to know when they can come in, but above all, I feel each and every one of us has a responsibility. Even if you don't have children, you can step in when your neighbor's child is being abused. We have a responsibility to look out for each other in this world and to leave the world a better place than we found it. I'm so happy that both of you are able to answer these questions for us. Thank you so much for being here today with us. Thank you so much for giving us your insights on different topics. We are really, really grateful. And if you have any closing remarks, I would love to hear them, and then we can sign off.
I just want to thank you for having us, for giving us this opportunity. I echo everything that you said. I can't wait until we can figure out how Mission Kids can come and help in Uganda and try to help change the response to child abuse. And I definitely want to thank our friends at ISPACAN, the International Society for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect, for helping us to host this discussion and get it out there, because I think it's just so important. If we can help one person, help one child, then it's all worth it today. And thank you, Ashaba, for coming up with this. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Abbie. Do you have any closing remarks, Colleen?
I just want to say thank you, Ashaba, for all the good work you're doing and for having us here today. We really appreciate it. And thank you, ISPACAN, for allowing us to do this. But more importantly, I agree with you 100%. Education and awareness, that's where it begins. And it begins, but then it has to continue, because from the work that we've done, I know, and the work that you're doing, Ashaba, it's you educate one, but then you have 10 more, right? So yes. I agree 100%. Education all the way. And thank you so much for doing this. It's great work.
Thank you so much, ISPACAN, for hosting us today and for such an incredible platform that we are putting out. We are really grateful for this. We are really grateful for our insights to be heard and to be shared with the rest of the world, because if you aren't able to walk and do this physical teachings, then the best thing we can do is an online platform, and that is also spreading awareness in itself. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Bye.